I think cybersecurity is a difficult market. It's a bit like insurance. It's like nobody really wants to pay for it, but at the same time, it has clear benefits
Hey, wait a second.
to
You live in
society.
Munich. You've got some
Yeah.
insurance companies last time I checked.
Yeah, I'm not invested into them. I wouldn't necessarily invest into a new insurance company, but the Germans love insurance.
Welcome to PEP, the Protect Europe podcast, where we interview founders and investors building the technology that protects Europe's values, way of life, and infrastructure. Every week, I try and bring you amazing founders and exceptional investors protecting Europe. Jonatan from Inflection and European Defence Tech is one of those. An exceptional investor diving deep with a hackathon background. This is a conversation not to miss.
Cool. Jonatan, so glad that you could make it on the podcast. It's really good to see you. So yeah, look, just introduce yourself. Tell us all about what you do and how did you end up in this kind of slightly interesting Protect Europe space?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Colin. So I'm Jonatan, Swedish and European. I'd say I lived in 4 different European countries so far, and studied in 4 of them as well. I guess what I do is allocate money to the right causes and to the right companies. So the main job that I do is as a VC of Inflection. We invest not just in Europe, but in Europe and the US mostly, into pre-seed and seed stage companies, into what we call sovereign compute. Sovereign compute is a term that we, I guess, made up, for lack of a better word.
Good terms are made up.
Yeah.
Come on, Shakespeare invented like 250 words, right? Come on. So go on, tell us what sovereign compute is.
Yeah, it's our way of framing A, what is currently going on in the world since the last 6-7 years, and B, what is going to be forward-looking, the most important technology shift in human history, and that is that of compute. So sovereignty, we see massive pushes towards deglobalization and importance of sovereignty, not just on a national level, but also on an individual level. So both me and Alex, my partner at Inflection, we're coming from the privacy space and have done a lot of work in cryptography and open technologies in the past that sort of democratizes access to technology. And going forward, we see this becoming increasingly important on a national strategic level. What was once, the premise of an individual is now becoming the mandatory option for nations. The compute.
Look, I couldn't agree more. It sounds very sad and geeky. I'll kind of put my hand up now. I think this whole energy compute stack and how you overlay it with geopolitics is basically the conversation I seem to have every day. In fact, one of the conversations I had this morning was basically around how the US economy is basically flat if you take out the big tech spend on data centers. And obviously the challenge with that is the big tech spend on data centers doesn't really, if you're in the data center business, but building business, happy days. Or if you're in the token, basically production or consumption basis, happy days. But if you happen to run a B2B account in Pennsylvania, then how does that help you guys? So this is super interesting to me. Okay, so then let's break down your thesis. Let's talk about a little bit around what you've invested in and how you think that now plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, we invested into our first real compute company, I would say. That was a space-based compute company that was doing very sensitive cryptographic operations in space, so in a very secure environment.
Okay.
They're now delivering compute to a couple of customers in the satellite space. So they have, I think, 3 or so customers called Aptus Orbital. Based on this sort of very esoteric first point, we've expanded into other areas of compute as well. So both on the pure software side, but also hardware, including, say, stratospheric compute. So actual stratospheric airplanes that do all kinds of data collection and communications protocols for Earth purposes mostly, but based in the stratosphere, which is pretty unexplored. We've also invested into semiconductor companies. So I was just on the phone a few minutes ago with the founder in Taiwan, or he's currently in Taiwan testing their first set of chips. They do cryptographic acceleration. So cryptography, that seems to me like the most magical thing ever, it's a very, very nerdy thing to say, I guess.
It's fine. You can put your hand up and say,
yeah.
I find cryptography very exciting. Round here, you're amongst friends.
Yeah, like to break it down, you take very abstract mathematics and then you turn that into, reasoning about data. And it turns out that you can do absolutely crazy things. Like you can take an encrypted data set, do an operation on them, say multiply all the numbers in it, get the result, and without having decrypted the actual input, you can get what the result is on an aggregated basis, right? Which sounds insane. Or you can prove something about the data set that is true, say all the numbers are over a certain other number without having revealed the data, which also sounds insane. Like how is this feasible? This is the sort of the extension of the whole zero trust paradigm that we're seeing. So we expect cryptography in general as a sector to become more and more complex and more important going forward with all kinds of compute advancements. So say we have more compute, we have more data, we want to do more things with the data, and we care about that data not getting in the hands of the wrong players, then the only solution is math. We have to use math to protect it.
Oh my God, we're gonna go very quickly to math. Math is everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so funny because I lived in Oxford for like 4 years. I lived in Cambridge for 7 years. And apart from Milton Keynes, the place that between Oxford, Cambridge, and London is a place called where Bletchley Park, where, basically a lot of this cryptography was invented. I remember taking my kids there for the first time, and they saw this representation of what was effectively Alan Turing's first computer. And it was the size of a room with no display screen. And my kids were little at the time, so they were like, where's the touchpad? And I was like, no, it didn't work like that. But the math was super impressive, and obviously that led to everything else. Okay, so that's aspect. And then what sort of what size do you come in? What stage do you come in? Again, do you have a particular geographical area that you target? What's the kind of fund dynamics for you guys?
Yeah. So we're a US domiciled fund, and to some small majority, mostly US LPs. Our investment so far have been 70% in Europe and the rest in the US. We have one in Canada as well. I'll count that as North America.
Shh, don't tell the Canadians.
Yeah. Or we can count it as Europe, even better. Let's count Canada as Europe.
That'll be fine.
And that's due to our networks. So both me and Alex are based in Germany, kind of accidentally. But yeah, we invest in pre-seed seed, so prefer to be the first check-in from $1 to $2 million out of the current $40 million fund. That will change in the near future as we're entering the last stage of our investment period. But with the current one, we try to be the best partners possible. And often founders ask us like, what's your target valuation or target ownership? We don't really have that. We look at each investment as a probability or possibility of being able to return the fund. Mm-hmm. So that means almost uncapped upside in terms of multiple. We need to have the possibility at least of doing a 50 to 100x. If there's some fundamental reason why that shouldn't be possible, then it's probably not an investment for us.
Absolutely. Look, I completely agree on that front. I remember talking to Tavit from Plural, and he's like, everything needs to be 100x. If we're not thinking of it, this could be 100x. We shouldn't be entertaining as an investment possibility. And also, whenever I've talked to one of the great investors, they never knew which of their winners were going to be their winners. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. It's always easy to say, oh, yes, and we invested in Canva and we invested in this. But actually, at the time, you just didn't know.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, certainly a couple of years into any portfolio of investments, the ones that you think are going to win aren't showing through, and the other ones that look great actually aren't your winners in the end anyway. So that, you have to have the probability of the return, but it's very easy to judge it in early days.
Yeah. I mean, there's the same about venture funds, right? Almost every venture fund goes through each of the quartiles of performance during their life cycle. And I think it's very much the same for a portfolio company. Sometimes we have super high, we feel very good about a certain portfolio company. It doesn't affect what we do with it. We treat them all like all children are equal, but we may feel more or less positive about a company. And then next quarter, they come back from the dead, or something massively falls apart. All these things are a possibility every day, essentially. So it's very futile to try and predict this type of success. The best thing we can do is be as supportive as possible, I guess, with the founders that we have picked to work with.
Yeah, and look, I always think in my own investments, I've always striven to add value to those companies. And I've also tried to make myself the investor that would be the first call. Right. So I'm the person that they ring when it's all gone to hell. I'm hopefully the person they ring when it's gone really well. But obviously, you only really earn that slot if you add real value to that company. If the founder knows that you are committed to them and committed to that company, and you really want to drive it forward, that spot has to be earned. But how did you get into this particular space? What's apart from hands up, nerd, cryptography, maths, etc.? Is that the story, or was there something else that got you here?
So that is my background. My former background is engineering physics, but what I did actually for work was quite different. So I was a developer. I was building programs and applications using cryptography always for companies like the World, or organizations like the World Food Programme and the UK DFID, which is now called something else. So it used to be.
Look, I was in the UK government for 5 years, changed every 5 minutes. I can't.
Yeah, exactly. But then I was somewhat frustrated because we built all this cool tech and it never actually got deployed, or in some rare cases it did get deployed, and that kind of paid for the whole experience. But so I wanted to go and see what actually is being deployed in the real world. I went to a larger consultancy working in the sort of tech department. I said I only want to do this if you promise me that I'll only be in the cool tech projects. And I ended up spending a lot of time in energy trading. So I was mostly in like utilities in Europe, working on their trading systems and their kind of strategy for keeping their trading systems and architectures intact and in volatile times. So close connection to that industry. I still felt like the actual technology that is being developed in startups isn't making its way to where I'm sitting for a very, very long time still. So I thought, okay, what's the highest leverage thing I can do? Probably go and figure out which companies should be getting there faster. And that was my way into venture. I've thought about a bunch of startups before, but I realized I don't feel like I have the edge to build a generational company, and I would rather back the people that I see have that. Specifically
that does make perfect sense, right? And again, I think we're all put on this world for something, and part of it is you have to find that something, and it doesn't have to be the same thing all the time. You can have stages and chapters in your life that look different. And if you really don't feel that you're going to be an exceptional founder, maybe you can be an exceptional investor backing exceptional founders.
I hope so. Yeah.
I think that's always the challenge. Like, I was a decent athlete. My sport was rowing. I was pretty good. I was actually a way better rowing coach than I was as an athlete. And my athletes ended up performing extremely well and doing extremely well for themselves, far ahead of where I could have got as an individual. And I just found that was just a better calling for me at that particular point in time.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you look across the landscape at the moment, I don't want to do the usual, have we got the talent in Europe? Because it's so clear that we have the talent in Europe. And I don't want to do the usual, and have we got the money in Europe? Because then we go into the sob story of there's not enough capital, blah, 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 blah. That's fine. Where do you see those where are you looking for technology or founder-wise? Where are the spaces that you think are really opening up in this sovereign compute area? So what's the landscape look like in terms of sovereign compute? Obviously, I hear a lot of stories about what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, about potentially sovereign embassies coming out of kind of UAE, etc., where they're basically offering that. Obviously, space continues to be a ridiculous pun, but like the frontier in terms of that particular areas. Where are you focused on in terms of the landscape?
Yep, good question. So I want to differentiate, because there's been a term that has emerged since we termed sovereign compute, and that is sort of sovereign AI, which is like a worse version of OpenAI and Anthropic, but based in Europe.
Is it? But it's not a company, it's just a term.
It's just a term. I've seen it thrown around. It's like, we need to create our own hyperscalers. And I'm like, no, that's not how markets work. This will not work. Like, just being in Europe for the sake of being the European version of X, I think is doomed to failure. We don't bet on those types of companies. We bet on companies that are globally competitive, but they happen to be in Europe. And I think we have really strong contenders for that, right? What I think we can make better use of in Europe is the fact that we are that fragmented and that we have all these separate markets. In some cases, this can be a benefit because there are problems that need to be solved because of this, right? That apply to potentially other parts of the world. Maybe not the US as a single market, but let's say Southeast Asia, for example. If I look at the companies we've invested into in the last couple of years in Europe, or in the last 12 months or so, they've been quite focused on defense. So we started something June 2024. We had our first big hackathon around defense in Europe.
Cool.
So I co-founded something called the European Defense Tech Hub together with Benjamin Walba, that is essentially running hackathons and various events for tech people for founders, for investors, for startups to connect them with people who actually know what is needed in defense tech. We have run, I think, 15 hackathons by now. So we just did one in Hamburg this past weekend. We did one in Milan the weekend before that, one in London before that, the weekend before that. So all over the place, including in Ukraine. And what we've learned during these events and interacting with people from the Ukrainian front lines, from every MOD in Europe, essentially, who are giving us some form of input, more or less helpful, but some form of input at least around what they need.
You're so polite. More or less helpful. I love that. That's going to be my new quote.
This has been incredibly, or this has been crucial in terms of our due diligence to understand which companies to invest into. So as an example, we did Nordic Air Defense earlier this year, or the beginning of this year, as a quite clear contender to a huge problem. Well, we think that it's going to be the Northern European solution to one part of the counter-drone onion, as you call it, where you have different layers of protecting against aerial threats. In some case unmanned, some case no signal or no signature at all. So they're based in Stockholm, doing incredibly well now. Have some very interesting partnerships coming up that I can't talk about, unfortunately.
Sure,
but
of course.
Yeah. We did a Ukrainian-Estonian company that is still somewhat in stealth that does unmanned ground vehicles, flying drones, and some other types of hardware, but also the connective tissue that allows you to essentially play the battlefield like you would play StarCraft, for example.
And at the moment, the hackathons clearly have shaping your thinking, shaping the connections. You're adding to the ecosystem. Some MODs are more or less helpful. I love that. But what's your now take on the defense tech or defense sector? Because again, not going to lead the witness. Again, we've been involved in this space for a while, and I think one of the areas is it's actually pretty immature in comparison, to lots of the other areas that you would have been investing in your time and energy in the past. And you've got basically the startup, and you've got the large OEM, Rheinmetall, et cetera, and there's nothing in between. It's almost like we've gone back to Silicon Valley. They've got apple trees. Fairchild Semiconductor has just kind of had the traitorous say, Y Combinator's we're in a time machine. Y Combinator's 25, 30 years in the distance.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit like that. Obviously, it's also in a time machine and it's catching up super quick. What's your take on that? What's your feel on the defense space today?
So again, not to make the dichotomy between US and Europe too strong, but I think here is, again, an example of somewhere where we have a clear advantage. We may have a smaller initial market or a more fragmented initial market, but we actually know what works. We have very clear examples and access to a source of truth in terms of what actually works. Now, that may not work for a Pacific war, but it will work for a land war with Russia in the Ukrainian conflict. But what I see a lot what I'm concerned about with the defense tech space is that we have this concentration risk of some companies, for example, Helsing, that has been massively funded, has extremely high expectations on them. Their bottleneck, I think, is not capital, it's not talent, because they have amazing people. It's actually the MODs. I think that they just you can't move faster than paper, right? You can't get more contracts signed because we have these processes that have been around for, in some cases, hundreds of years. So it's just, there's this fundamental rate limiter in terms of growth. And we were seeing this to some degree. I suspect Helsing is seeing this. I don't know anything internal to them, even though they're one of our greatest partners for the hackathons. But what I suspect is that the same thing is going to be worse for smaller startups. The ones that need contracts even worse than Helsing, they're going to be rate limited much earlier, right? Because they don't have the power, so they have to partner up with, say, Rheinmetall, or they have to partner up with a Shield AI or a similar company from the US. And then, all the European defense tech startups become subcontractors to a big US prime or a big European prime. That won't be pretty, I think. Not for returns and not for the companies. We're already seeing a bunch of these acquisitions of smaller companies, like Helsing acquired a 40, 50-year-old aerospace company a few months ago. My personal suspicion was that it was not actually for the aircraft, but it was for the machines that make the aircraft itself, which I think is another rate limiter. We just can't produce enough tooling to produce all the things that we need to produce.
I think that's a really interesting take, because quite clear in the fact that effectively at this point in time, Europe knows what the truth is, needs to move fast. The money is there, the talent is there, but effectively you're having to still push through systems. And those systems are designed to go at a particular place because that's what they were designed.
Yeah.
And unless you literally start a war, like an official war, the systems, as we saw with COVID, right? You know, the FDA didn't move fast until suddenly it had to move fast, and things got done much, much quicker. But that was because it was extraordinary circumstances, etc. Now, that's really quite interesting. And at the moment, just segueing slightly, what about the space area? You know, so, you know, obviously we can wrap space into defense or we can keep it separate on that side. Where are you on the kind of, obviously ISI and others are doing some really interesting stuff. Everybody obviously is fueled by or rate limited by SpaceX, but you know, at this point in time, that's still a very good rate limiter because they are effectively a beast in pushing through in terms of satellites. Where are you on the space side?
So we've done, well, we're closing our latest space investment right now, actually out of the UK. It's generally the sector is, I think, strategically massively important, right? And even though people have been talking about, when Starship comes online for the last, 2 or 3 years, people are still not accounting for all the things that we're going to be needing and all the possibilities of, well, I guess to create businesses around what is actually the consequence of having a $100 per kilo launch cost to LEO, right? At the same time, some things may be way ahead of time or way too early. But we've looked at a few like lunar mining companies, for example, which once they go live, once we have a lunar economy and so on, then amazing. You know, they'll be the Standard Oil of space or something. But until then, there's still so many other things to do, right? There's so many more pressing problems.
Don't tell me that. I want asteroid mining. Come on.
Absolutely, yeah. I want the solar sunshade, and I want the Dyson sphere as well, and like all this stuff. But
my son did a project actually on Standard Oil the other day, and I was like, I re-looked back on my figures on that, and they had 94% market share.
Yeah,
94% of oil and gas in America. I was like, okay, that's the definition of a monopoly.
Yeah, and there was so I just read a book as the whole AI bubble keeps inflating. I guess I was reading up on the history of the SEC in the US. So there's a book called Taming the Markets that I can recommend. It's fairly biased, or it's framed in a very biased way, I think, but still interesting. And it talks about the sort of on a tangent about the regulation of utilities in the US. And it turns out that there was massive outcry by the local monopolies of the utility companies when the government said, we also want to create an alternative utility company in your region. They said, no, this is unfair competition, which is hilarious, but I think very, very fair, and for the end user much better, for the entire market also much better, right? I guess what is the regulation of various services in space look like? I have no idea, but
I think that's a good one. I just finished, and it's been out a while, but it was good for me to revisit it. Hacker and the State. I don't know if you've done that one. It's actually quite a good one. It's basically a brief history of cyber and hacking from different state and development perspectives. So actually it was a quite useful one to kind of revisit some of the stuff, which is, when did this happen? When did this happen? When did this happen? How did it change? It was almost like a history of hacking, a book on that side. So it was good as a kind of a catch up, revisit certain things and just align it in mind. And obviously just finishing off with that aspect, in terms of, are you looking at more also the cyber? Obviously we talk, cryptography, etc. Do you get more into that space or less?
I think cybersecurity is a difficult market. It's a bit like insurance. It's like nobody really wants to pay for it. But at the same time, it has clear benefits.
Hey, wait a second.
To
you
society.
Live in Munich. You've got some insurance companies last time I checked.
Yeah, I'm not invested into them. I wouldn't necessarily invest into a new insurance company, even though Germans love insurance. There was
Speaking very nicely as a non-German. Well done.
Yes. Yeah. There were 3 events about a month ago, I think, where we had massive supply chain attacks in open source software.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, like NPM got had an exploit, and this is some of my, I have a couple of nightmares. One is around snakes, One is around like a bio attack and total annihilation. One is around AGI, and another one is around like a cyber virus or some kind of cyber attack on like everything, right? At a very, very large extent that just, of course, it's scary. Okay, I can't use my computer, but the consequences are way, way scarier down the line, right? Of actually like all of our digital history has been erased, or we can't control the transformers or our electrical grid. All of these second and third order effects are terrifying, as shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And still, it's very, very hard to find a good investment in this space, I think, from a venture perspective, right? I think from a state perspective, this is a no-brainer. And it's actually the same with defense, right? I don't know if venture's role is to build the next cruise missile, or if that is actually a state business.
Yeah, and I think, again, what's the snake nightmare?
Oh God, I don't know. Some Freudian hobby psychologist is gonna make something up here, but I'm just very, very scared of snakes.
That's fine. Like I remember that because I'm really old. I remember that scene in Indiana Jones where he's like, snakes. Like, why did it have to be snakes?
Exactly. Yeah. Many similarities between me and Harrison Ford, of course.
Anyway, he's a very funny guy. Okay, but that was very funny. I like this. Look, I think ultimately that's the whole issue. The more that we put ourselves online, the more of our lives, everything, pensions, everything connected, and then again the scariness of delete everything. Right, rewrite everything. And again, part of that hacker in the state thing was just explaining, okay, so Aramco, they just took them down and there was, literally the guys could do nothing, or Sony Music, etc., etc. Oh yeah, really interesting. But then it comes back to how do you then make it a decent returnable investment opportunity? And again, what is the role of venture in this particular space as just one asset class and VCs in terms of this area to really make a return, but also potentially strengthen and help Europe succeed by creating these kind of category leading companies? Fantastic. Really, really interesting. Okay, moving on from snakes, who do you admire? Right. So is there a founder or an investor? This is where we can name names in a good way. Who do you like who's building in Europe, investing in Europe in this space at the moment?
Good question. I mean, I admire almost all of our founders, to be honest.
Of course, but you have to have a favorite child. So give me a favorite child.
So unless you've had him on the podcast already, you should absolutely talk to Jens Holzapfel. He's someone I admire deeply. Okay, I will make the introduction. So Jens spent 20 years in Swedish defense and intelligence community, and spun out way before anyone else had this thought in the venture world. At least spun out sounds fancier than it is. He quit his job and said, let's start a cybersecurity defense fund. This is what Europe needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that took some severe courage. All right, as someone without any private business background at all, without any technical background, and just say, I know what we need. Let's just go and create that. I think that's something I admire deeply.
Look, I think ultimately conviction is kind of overused particularly in American VC trope. Have you got conviction on this? And again, I truly admire the founders and the investors who go all in on this. Like someone who's, may not come from money, quitting their job, signing up for a mission, whether that's to build the company or build the firm that builds the companies. Yeah, sounds a little bit Elon, build the factory. But build the firm that builds the companies is someone of real conviction. So that's a great shout out. I absolutely love that. That's been brilliant.
And he ended up working for one of our portfolio companies now.
Yay!
Doing really, really good work with Nordic Air Defense. Fantastic.
We'll look forward to having you on the podcast later. So look, this has been fantastic. You've been amazing. Sorry about the kind of snake stuff. So we won't judge on that side. And look, we look forward to catching up in the next 6 months or so. Find out how the hackathons are going because they sound super cool.
Thanks. Yeah. See you at the next one.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. To make sure you catch us again, please follow us on your favorite podcasting platform.